I think it's if I had to make a quick, like, very concise statement, granola, about pitch, um, regardless of what my reference of my pitch is, if I'm capable of pitching whichever way I think I want to pitch, then it doesn't concern me, because when I decide what the pitch is, I will adjust to the pitch. There's a difference between being concerned that you can't do it versus concerned that uh versus you probably practice how you're able to do it but not accurately. So it doesn't concern me whether it's accurate or not, because my pitch is not off or on, because I'm not concerning the accuracy of the pitch, but the production of the pitches. So it would be very, very concerning, I would say, to people who want to make a pitch and cannot produce the pitch that they're sounding. But that's perfectly fine. I would be concerned then. However, I am not concerned that I'm producing a pitch that I'm imagining it. So if I want to sound like something, I am being able to produce it. So being accurate to me personally, is superfluous to practicing pitch. So without practicing pitch, being overly concerned about accuracy is something you concern with yourself less until you actually can produce pitches. So that's kind of my thought on the topic. It's not for everyone. I prefer doing before concerning with accuracy. I try my best with all the things that are available to me, and then I adjust as I go. So it defeats someone's purpose who's stuck with concerning themselves with things like pitch accent and then refusing to do anything else until they get the pitch correctly. That is slowing them down. It's preventing them from doing something. It also makes them incredibly closed-minded, and it slows them down. So while they're deliberating on the best way to get pitch accent correctly, I am producing pitch as I'm going. So it's kind of like an alternative perspective on it. Not necessarily one that's right or accurate, right? But I do not concern myself with accuracy of people's determination versus being able to do it. So if I can choose to run faster or more efficiently later. Can I do the running now? I can, in my own way. So that's kind of how I'm approaching this. If it annoys people or concerns them, then they're not the people that I'm associating with, right? So if someone comes up and say, boy, I can't afford to sit here and listen to you because you triggered me. It's like, well, then don't listen and go somewhere else. There are a lot of people in the world. I wouldn't ever, in my opinion, because I believe this in myself, when someone comes up to me and speaks English to me, like, for example, this person comes up to me and say, your pitch accent's all wrong in English. And I'm like, well, your English is wonderful, although it doesn't sound like my English. So that's kind of how I take upon myself, because I'm an English speaker. I don't go out of my way to discourage that. If you want to sound like me, that's perfectly fine. I can understand you. You can understand me. We certainly don't sound like each other. However, if you want to sound like me, feel free. And that's, in my opinion, is a more desirable perspective on spreading the influence of the language you love and the language you use. Languages that focuses on those concerns are languages that have died out, in my opinion. So or are dying, right? They are less flexible. I don't think Japanese is one of those languages in the future. Perhaps if I'm not the minority, then yeah, then Japanese will continue to stay in Japan. And the people who want to speak Japanese will continue to move to Japan. And then the people outside of Japan would care less and less about the language if people go around worrying about the accuracy of their pitch accent. In my opinion. Like, precisely. It's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off. The more strict you are with the language, the less likely you're going to stick with it, in my opinion. Especially as someone who doesn't speak native Japanese. But you still eventually want to get good at pitch. I will eventually be able to sound like someone I want to sound like, is probably the way I'm gonna say it. Get good is a terrible phrase, in my opinion, for myself, because the person that I love to listen to might not be good at pitch. So what I mean by that is, if I play a video game, I don't play to get good. I play to gain experience. So, with enough Japanese exposure, I will pick up an accent. Whether that is good or not, it's not of my concern, because I live in a world where all my languages that I have different pitches and accents. So to be concerned about what is a good accent and what is a bad accent is literally the thing I spent most of my life dealing with. And personally, I don't want anyone to have to deal with that. As in, like, oh yeah, your American accent kind of sucks. Like, why don't you sound like this American? Or, wow, your Mandarin really sounds like Fujianese. Like, why can't you speak better Mandarin? That kind of thing is my entire life, and I don't want anyone else to have to deal with that. I want them to have fun and want to, learn language and stuff. So will I get good at a pitch? If it does happen, that's pretty cool. If it doesn't, that's pretty cool. That's fine, because there will, no matter how skilled you are, there will be someone who is going to criticize in this case, it would be your accent, because the Japanese accent varies in pitch accent. However, in English, I get criticized. I still receive lots of criticisms about my English, my articulation, right? The way I pronounce English words. So I don't want to concern myself with that. One day, as a short answer, I hope to sound like someone that I listen to a lot. As in, if there's an influence out there, if there's an influencer out there that I absolutely love, I think being next to them or consuming and like being like them will eventually turn that accent into what it is. So like, for example, if I suddenly moved from North United States to South United States, there is a very high chance I will end up sounding Southern, as in I like to pick up whoever influences my life. So instead of picking based on pragmatism, I will probably end up picking a pitch and an accent based on whoever inspires me. So if there's a content creator out there, like for example Dogen, lots of people like Dogen, whoever influenced me the most, I'm probably going to end up naturally adapting to their pitch. The way I speak English is largely inherited and based on all the people that influence me. So there is a chance it might not just be one person, it could be 2 or 3, and I pick up pitches and accents based on how often I hear the the people around me. And I think that's what most people who has a healthy relationship with language learning end up doing. They end up being inspired and influenced by the people they listen to. I sound northern because I'm surrounded by Northern American English speakers. At some point when I was in New Zealand, I started picking up New Zealand accent for a moment because we kept talking about the different, like the British, the difference between Australian, New Zealanders, and British accent. At some point, some of our words kind of changed and stuff. Like we used keen a lot and whatnot. So you kind of pick these things up. But competency comes first. Comprehension, being able to create any sorts of, it's like practicing scales. As a musician, if you cannot practice your scales and hit all the notes, learning the proper way to play Mozart's piece will only allow you to play Mozart's piece like that. It does not give you any flexibility without understanding how to play the fundamentals and whatnot. So this is kind of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to practice as many of the different fundamentals. I like to believe it's preparing me for it. Might not. We might find out that there's things I don't know how to do. That's fine too. It means I have more to learn. After learning Norwegian, where almost everyone I see speaks with a different accent, I started appreciating accent diversity, and specifically when it's all within an understandable degree. Yeah. I speak English. English is my main English is my common language, right? So if there's any language that has different accents, it's English. And I hope that people who use English aren't gonna be like, I kid you not, in Japan, it's one of the countries that have the most resistance to picking up English, really, honestly, or other languages. I think since English is my main language, it just happens to be that language where if you take a perspective of good accents and bad accents, you're going to have a very, very terrible time with English. You're going to constantly have insecurities about, oh, but I don't want to speak English because I have a bad accent. I'm like, what is a bad English accent? I don't know. I understand you. So there are still countries, obviously United States being one of them, and then Great Britain or the UK being one of them, where there's still this idea of what's correct accent and what's not correct accent or correct ways of speaking things. But I don't think English is a language that's bound by the whole idea of good accent, right? And hey, who knows? I'm not gonna live in Japan, so I have no aspirations of living in Japan. Perhaps when I visit Japan and everyone says like, dude, your accent's terrible, it's like, all right, well, at least they understand me. And then I'll go back to the United States. And what do you do in the United States? Well, when someone speaks English to you and you understand them, that's the first thing you do. You don't really, actually, some of the first things an American would do, in my opinion, me specifically, like the Americans around me, we would be excited to ask you where your accent comes from, because you sound different, and that's cool, as opposed to you sound weird, unnatural, and not good. So that's probably not the most common interaction you'll have. So when someone says they're learning English, I'm more excited to hear what their English sounds like versus if they sound like me, because I don't know what me sounds like. It's to the point where I move to the next state, like I go to the next state over, and someone tells me, oh, you sound like you came from this state. And I'm like, wait, how do you know? Like, you just sound different. Like, oh, Well, that's cool. You sound different too. Although I'm not good enough to pick up where you're from based on your stress accent, right? Or your word usage. So that's kind of the thing. At least in my opinion. Bro really has the totem of motivation. Is that a thing? The totem of motivation? I should make a totem. English learning is definitely not for fun. What do you mean by English learning is not for fun? Are you learning English right now? Hiroko? I want to make English learning fun for other people. Honestly, having such a big common language, it can be very daunting without rules and stuff. So I can understand how Japanese people would want to stick strictly to rules and try to make sure that all their pronunciation and stuff is consistent. So I have to concede, right? I have to concede that I want English to be dynamic and diverse. However, it can make it very, very difficult to know what's desirable and what's not if you're that kind of person. So if you're the kind of person that needs to know, how do I know this is good? It will be very difficult. However, my rebuttal is you don't have to. You can pick your favorite person, the one that you adapt most comfortably, or pick your favorite tools or group and learn from there. And that's how I'm treating Japanese. For better or for worse, that's how I'm treating Japanese. Whatever came first is what I'm starting with. You're always in learning? Me too. That's a fantastic statement, Hiroko. The difference is that English is treated as a means of communication and Japanese is usually treated as a hobby, a sport where perfection is the goal, which I don't really mesh with. Yeah, true. That's a fair example. Actually, Granola, that's a really cogent point about the difference between a necessity, like an obligation, versus a voluntary choice. For example, yesterday I learned this word diligently and so on. Yeah, diligently is fantastic word. Like I'm not an English teacher. However, I do have a wonderful cluster of special words, and diligent is a great one. Like instead of saying very careful, right? Some people would say very careful. This would be less than high school level, right? But if you want to sound like college plus, diligent. Diligent is the replacement word. It's one of few replacement words, too, for very careful. You'd be diligent. And then, carefully, very carefully, diligently. Right? There's also staying, some people would say staying focused, right? Staying focused, this is less than high school level. And when you get over here, you would say vigilant. You would use the word vigilant. Right? Or like you are able to use the word vigilant if you want it. Staying focused, staying like paying attention, vigilant. So there's wonderful words that I don't use, by the way, on stream. I don't use lots of these words on stream. However, if I was in a professional setting or like a business meeting or something that requires more formal, right? More formal or like professional setting, I would switch over most of my vocabulary. My diction would change as well. Like my diction would change, and I would use words like diligently, vigilantly, What's another word? Like very kind, benevolent, right? Benevolent would be a word I would use. Benevolent, right? Everything that deals with like degrees, most of those words would change. I don't think 90% to 95% of online content would engage in this level of conversation in English. Where in Japan, honestly, I actually think they do engage in formal, even when you're learning as a hobby. Like in Japan, as a hobby, you're already introduced to formal speak, right? There's already formal speak. But in English, there's not a lot of formal speak. Yeah, you tried to replace very. I don't want to say very hard. Yeah, difficult. But we use the word difficult, so it's not too bad. Difficult is a word that many use already for very hard, right? Difficult. As opposed to very hard. Difficult. Easy, very easy, right? Very easy. I do a business like thing and I would say accessible. If it's very easy, it's accessible. Yeah. Like, I'm glad you find learning Japanese accessible as opposed to very easy. If I had to describe like subjective terms and whatnot. So accessibility is typically, so these lists goes on. Like you practically, that's why whenever I think about Japanese, it's kind of cool because you end up using all the words constantly. In English, I feel like in English, let's say I don't know how many words you need. Let's say 2000. 2000 seems to be like a number these days. So let's say you have your first 2000 words. I feel like at least if you're going into like a professional setting, I would say at least half those words, half, like 50% of those words are substituted with another 1000. So you end up stop using, in my opinion, out of frequency, half those words, and you're learning 1000 new words to replace them, which I'm not using. Like replace, like the word replace, I'll use the word substitute. Substitute. As opposed to replace, right? Replace, substitute. There are different manners of replacements, and the word that people are using, replace, they're talking about substitute. But there's also alternative. Alternative, right? This is not to replace, but it's an act of replacing. So if you use an alternative, you are likely also referring to replacing something. There's also the contrast to, like, instead of replace that people talk about, they're talking about complementary. Complementary and supplementary. So all of these words, in high school level or lower, use the word replace to imply all these things. But they're not specific enough. Supplement doesn't necessarily mean replace. Complement doesn't either. Substitute is the closest thing, and then alternative doesn't really mean that too. However, when you're like reading Twitch chat and stuff, right? When someone says replace, they have to explain what they mean by replace. Because a lot of times, to someone like me, when you say, oh yeah, for example, there are better things, right? There are better things. What does that mean? There are better alternatives, there are better substitutes, there are better complements, or there are better supplements. All those are not specific enough. Right. Effortless? Oh, very easy. Effortless? Effortless is great. Effortless is pretty good. Uh, Hiroko. Uh, and it's not necessary. All this is not necessary, in my opinion. Like, everyday speak, you don't enter these things. When you are giving presentations and interviews and maybe like job stuff and promotions, then you kind of get into this type of thing, which is very exhausting. It's very tiring at the same time. It's rewarding if you want, if you think of it as rewarding. It can be very exhausting though. Sometimes I learn a word like and ask myself, where the F I will use that. I stop focusing on them. Yeah, yeah. So we're talking about colloquial speak, right? And I think Japanese has that too. And I think it's more ingrained into their stuff for learning material than English. I don't think English places pressure on subtitles are cringe. Oh, here we go again. Okay, let's see. Let's see. I think anything can be unfun if you have to learn it. And English is something that a lot of people have or feel like they have to learn. That's fair. That's a fair statement. I don't feel the same way most of the time. However, that is definitely the impression I get a lot. When you have to do something, it creates negative stress. And when you're voluntarily doing something, oftentimes that leads to positive stress with a big asterisk. I probably won't expound upon it here because I already spent a little too much time. Japanese, it's a means of communication for most people because most people learning Japanese want to settle in Japan and very few people treat it as a hobby. That is a point. That's definitely a point to consider, and that's why I always I tend to counter and rebuttal for myself because I gotta remember that when I talk to other people, I need to remind them that I have no aspirations to live in Japan. And I don't identify as someone who wants to be Japanese adjacent. So that's often a great way to offset and make sure that I communicate my goals. I don't know, I feel more people learn it because they like anime. That is a fair point too. It's all of the above. So we're not making a competition, right? It's not a competition between what. It's likely a mix of all of the above. That's just who you're around. I guess statistically it's the other way around. Yes. Again, sampling bias and all that stuff. What's it? Why people learn? Can I see them? And learning Japanese for anime feels so funny to me. Not gonna lie, you can watch it in English. Okay, wait 1 second. Subtitles are cringe. I don't like to read. Also, hello. How's the stream? Subtitles are cringe. Okay. There's a lot of there are a lot of glowing little things here, but you guys are having conversations between yourselves, so I won't jump in as a third wheel here. You watch dub. I just want to be different. I have no problems with subtitles. Oh, you just want it to be different from. Okay, so fancier English is funny because it often means replacing the words that I first had to learn, yeah, with words that sound more like Portuguese words, like difficult substitute are closer to point. Yeah, no, yeah. Fancier English. Wait, we learn English in school since kids school, and now in 10th grade, and literally no one in my class know how to make a sentence in English. Hiroko, I don't want to hear that, but it's so scary. It's true. I mean, like, what I mean is, I don't want to hear it, but I know it exists, and it kind of saddens me a little. I don't want to like start a crusade or anything, but it is kind of how it's happening. Until now, to be honest, until now, I'm not sure why I study Japanese. I want the reason to find me. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the reason found me. So, someone asked, I get asked a lot, like, why are you learning Japanese? The reason found me. That's pretty much how it goes. Most of the things I did in my life, the reasons found me. And you might be thinking, well, then aren't you sad that you never made your own choices and do your own things? Well, I make my own choices when the reason finds me. So like I found my calling. I found my like the stuff found me. And the choices I make after are the choices that I feel create ownership of the thing. So why learn Japanese now? Like I have reasons to now. And you might be thinking, well, then it's not a hobby, right? Like, well, yes and no. Uh, it's one and the same. My hobbies and my life's work and my career, I like doing them. So it's a privilege, right? We have to keep in mind it's a privilege. I was lucky, and things found me. It's not so true about everyone. So I'm only speaking from personal experience, not to paint a life hack or anything. This is not life experience, life advice or life hack. I'm exchanging my experience. If you're so dedicated to watching anime so much, then I think learning the language is just a natural step. It allows you to understand the culture of it better. I'm going to say within the subset of people who watch anime, that's not the case. Usually. And I can prove it without using anime, actually. I can prove it with using English. There is, but is that worth to go through thousands of hours of learning just for that small passion in the voice? So, in my opinion, learning Japanese for anime is extremely niche. Only the very hardcore ones learn the language for anime. I'm gonna make a counter argument, and I'm gonna say the way you guys are using English now, just because you watch a lot of English programming doesn't mean you learn anything about the language. It takes active participation to learn anything. So you can watch thousands of hours of anime and accrue no motivation to learn the language naturally. And it goes the same with English and math and science and logic, philosophy, anything you learn in high school. Motivation is, in my opinion, axiomatic. It supersedes all of that. So you could passively do tons of things without learning anything. Granola thinks every dub is essentially a parody. If you're satisfied with someone else's interpretation of a show, that's fine. I learned enough Japanese to see the huge difference in sub and dub. Interesting perspective. Our education system are not to learn how to speak more than answering the final paper exam. Unfortunately is useless. It can be. It definitely can be. It doesn't intuitively teach the person early on how to apply it creatively. Yes. Kind of like Duolingo. Duolingo doesn't intuitively help you apply what you're learning. Pretty much most formal education things. And just so you know, that includes most YouTube content. It doesn't actually intuitively tell you how to apply things. Input is one thing, but integration and synthesis of input is another step. And that is effectively something that matures and improves your ability to output something that is transformative. So you can know a lot of things, like an internet expert. You can know a lot of things. Without experience, there's a high chance you cannot synthesize that information and apply it constructively. So, for example, I could learn pitch accent and just memorize the pitch accent. That's kind of cool. But for myself, I like to synthesize and transform the things I learn. That's how I learn. So when I learn sushi, I learn about how to express and look at sushi differently. And I said sushi because that's how Americans say it. So whether that's accurate or good, it allows me to transform the information. And that becomes part of me. So what do you make of the things you learn? That, in my opinion, is the end game for me. Not how good you reproduce something that someone else already does. Not saying that that's not great for language learning and stuff. My purpose of learning Japanese is very different. Yeah. Much like you guys, when you're saying like dubs and subs and stuff, it's what you make of it, right? When you think that someone who says for example, Granola thinks a dub is a parody of the original, that's someone that cannot, in my opinion, unlikely to appreciate transformative things, right? And that's a choice. That's a mental choice you make. I do not. If I believed in that, then I wouldn't believe in people asking me and contributing to my learning experience. I would be the kind of person who determined what's the best way to study and be refractory to anyone else's input, because you know the best. So therefore you are unable to synthesize and appreciate something that's different because they're imitating the thing. So like for anime, when an anime is dubbed over, the original is the original, and anything over it is an imitation, a facsimile of it. So it's cheapened by that person's mind, right? Do I think dubs are a cheapened version of whatever the original language is? No, it's not. It's something different in which I can learn something from and treat it differently and, appreciate it differently. I can't express how much more constraints and ability and necessity of knowledge in order to execute a dub versus a sub. So, like in a different way. Like what I mean is the skills required for dubbing is different than the skills required for writing the original script. So, would you say is rendition? Would you say it's a rendition? No, I'll still call it a dub. I mean, I'll still call it a dub. The dub has taken on that meaning. And video games is a great example. I play Like a Dragon, and they are dubbed in 3 languages. And I did say dubbed in 3 languages, as in it is dubbed in Japanese. It is written in Japanese, but it is also dubbed in Japanese, along with English and Mandarin. They are very different beasts. And an execution of the dubbed is beautiful when the English track sounds like English, the Mandarin track sounds like Mandarin, and the Japanese track sounds like Japanese. Now, I do concede that in anime dubs, they try to, depending on the studio that's doing the dub and the people, they might try to make the language that it is not try to sound like it. So like, they try to make English sound like Japanese, which inherently is a logical fallacy. So they are not the same. What makes it in your mind that you can treat both of them the same? So that you can probably tell, right? That you can probably tell. So I'm not saying that anime dubs are all around glowing, fantastic products of writing. Understanding these nuances allow you to appreciate how difficult it is and who's in control and who's determining what is being done. Like the anime company themselves might want the English voice actors to sound Japanese in English. So inherently, that might be actually normal sounding to the Japanese audience. That is their target. However, there are animes that are deliberately trying to sound English, and then the dubs had full wielding command of their English dubs. Case in point, Cowboy Bebop. I don't have to pick a modern anime. Cowboy Bebop. It's a classic. Listen to the English dub. It's actually predicated on English mannerisms and English source materials. So, you know, they're rare gems, obviously, because the Japanese writers and stuff imagine their characters to sound a specific way, even in English. So, hey, do I know? I didn't. Someone else knows Norwegian. Eroko. Nar knows Norwegian, right? Yeah. Most watchers don't care about learning the language as far as I've seen. They just stick to subtitles, right? And I have other reasons to learn Japanese, yeah. I feel like the dub is too hated. It's almost universally hated in the anime community. They will bully you if you say you watch dub. I do all of the above. Actually, I will extend even more. I watch the English dub with English subtitles. I watch English programming with English subtitles because writing is a different aspect of reading. If you're a language learner, I'm sure you'll be able to appreciate that. Reading, hearing are two different things. I watch Japanese with Japanese subtitles. I watch Japanese with English subtitles. I watch English now with, if they're available, I also watch English with Japanese subtitles. And usually that's video games a lot of times, but I do all the above. Reading and hearing and seeing and hearing are two different properties. So if you're a language learner and you're having an argument about what is the right way to consume things, then I don't think, in my opinion, humbly, you understand what it takes to appreciate language, because language is both auditory and written, right? So why would you create a double standard in the way you consume material by saying, I don't need to read and I only need to hear? At least in my opinion. I'm learning the language by reading and hearing. So it's no different from my daily life. I have constantly both read and hear things. I go to class and hear a professor while reading something the professor is writing. When you go to school, you do both. Unless you're telling me you're one of those C students that only listen or read and not pay attention all the time. I'm just saying. A little shade, but not too much shade. Because I'm probably speaking the truth in this case. Fairly accurate. I don't understand why, honestly, they have the irrational hate for it just because it's different. I mean, yeah, it's just sort of irrational, almost gatekeeping feeling, especially when they haven't even watched the dub in full. All right, enough. Yeah. Let's keep it a little positive, you know? They're very passionate. People are very passionate. You've seen English and Brazilian dubs of anime. Some can be very good. It's very dependent on the actor's performance. Well, let's keep in mind that actor's performance, people's preferences, how well they adapt the plot, and how natural the source material is. Also, don't forget money, target audience, right? Target audience, PR relationships, and the original vision of the developer and the writer. The authors and the developers also have a say in how they're perceived in other languages or how it's taken care of. So if you have an author that doesn't care, or maybe it's superficial or something, then the company, there, it gets really, there are quite a lot of possible driving forces behind the quality. I just don't like someone else's interpretation of a story you like. That's fair. That checks out, Granola. Japanese to English can get very awkward. I've seen the difference and I can't go back, honestly. That's fine. It just means that creatively you are less receptive to other things, Granola. So like for me, I wouldn't be streaming if I followed the same mindset. You like connecting with writers directly? That's fair. But there are more than one writer. The writer of the English is another writer. So you're making an exclusive double standard, which is healthy, which is very healthy. Lots of people will probably relate to you, Granola. But what you just said was a double standard, right? Because you said you like connecting with the writer. There are two sets of writers here, right? You're favoring the one writer over another writer. Instead of saying you want to connect with writers, you're saying, in my opinion, my interpretation, you want to connect with the original writer. Because there are other writers. Dubbers are writers too. It takes a lot, like, imagine, I'm already having trouble translating myself for learning Japanese. You only want to connect with the original one. So when I'm learning Japanese, this is making me appreciate even more all the writers that have to come after the original, right? If you're learning a language, that could be something you appreciate, or you can reject it, right? And to me, I think you would likely reject it, because you did ask me earlier, what happens if I sound, if my pitch is off, or am I concerned about getting a good accent? So for me, let's think about a world that uses that perspective. Let's imagine a world that uses your perspective right now, in my opinion. Then that means that if your comment represents a trend, then you are a cheap facsimile, as in you are not the original. So if you always need an original idea in order to be substantially important, for myself, I would be very disappointed in me all the time. I would find it very difficult for me to find something that's valuable, because humans are linear creatures. The things you do now are based on an originator. So how can, in my opinion, I would find it very difficult to find value in what I do if I'm always bombarded by someone who's already doing it. And I don't want people to think of it like that. I want you to take knowledge and create something new from it, something different from it. So when I consume anime and I consume things, and then there's like a reinterpretation or a remake or a reboot of video games and reboot of literature, you have to understand, in my opinion, I want to really encourage people to understand that humans don't live long enough to constantly see the original. So at some point, You're going to live long enough to see something recreated, something reimagined. I usually tell people I give it about 10 to 20 years. So like every decade, there's going to be a reimagining of something. So if you live long enough, you're either going to hate everything you've lived long enough to appreciate, go away, and change, or you become happier, in my opinion, and have a perspective like me. And I'm not even 40 yet, to see things reimagined more than once already. I've seen the whole video game industry redefine itself 3 times now, right? Every 10 decades, every 10 years. Are you still going, like, as a creator, as someone who wants to stay creative? I couldn't find myself saying, oh, this isn't like 30 years ago. It's like, well, it isn't like 30 years ago. Is that going to keep you from liking the things now? Like, am I going to become that 80-year-old and say, back in my day, this part is more important. I don't think originality is the crux. No ideas and shows are truly original after all. Writers write to connect with people, and I'm trying to get as close to them as they want to me but you're not, Granola. Like, let me, that's a little aggressive. You are connecting with a writer. You are connecting with a subset of writers. So I want it to be very clear that you favor, and it is contributing to the crux of your this double standard that we don't meet. You are connecting with a very specific group of people. You have sidelined, in my opinion, respectfully, you have sidelined anyone else who's trying to transform an original piece of work. So that includes dubbing, that includes voice acting, that includes a remake, a reboot. Those things, you are less likely, in my opinion, to connect with those people because you choose to think that they're not as an important writer as the others. So for me, I'm not as an important content creator as someone who is already doing this before me, is what I'm thinking, right? If my advice overlaps with another person's advice, then that you're going to choose favorites. Or at least I feel like you're going to prefer one over the other, whichever one is better, I suppose. And that's kind of the whole, like, which one's better, which one's good, which one's more accurate. So when it comes to creative process, I feel like your preferences, like people's preferences, I won't talk about you, sorry. When people's preferences have to be conditional, like if you choose to enjoy something, say in anime, and you found out that this anime is the understudy of some other famous director who originally did it, where you can choose for it to cheapen your thought about it, or you can see it as a different thing, right? And dubbing is also like that. While dubbing is a little cruder, and it's easier to, in my opinion, easier to see or appreciate, what about reboots, right? I can tell you, the majority of people would probably agree with you that reboots are something no one asked for, but I don't think it's for the same reasons, like constructively, right? That's a bit of a digression. I like talking about this stuff, but I think I might hit too many nerves here, so I don't want to be too aggressive here. I've already gotten to some hot waters before trying to assume something. What's a take-home message I want to say? The take-home message, in my opinion, is that when when I'm reading your comments, right? When I'm reading Nara's comments, Hiroko's comments, you and yours, Granola, I don't see you guys as representatives of a trend or a connection of people. I'm connecting with you guys. So I will be investing my darndest to try not to generalize the people I interact with. Now the problem that I encounter a lot of times is the opposite, which when people connect with other people, they take a representative approach. Like, oh, yeah, this writer wanted to give this message. So when anybody else write about this person's writer's like composition, they're trying to capture the same thing that writer is trying to say. I don't think that's the case. I don't want to see it that's the case. I see another person trying to make their own spin. Now, if you're wondering, is that what people do? No, they don't, because they're a business, right? For example, anime, pragmatically speaking, in order to not to upset people, they will continue to try to mirror and imitate what they say, because in my opinion, people like Granola and others, they are the more vocal and probably the statistical majority. As in, what I mean is, in anime, when it gets dubbed, the businesses are going to attempt to make the English content like the Japanese content, because it produces less friction, and it's likely to be received a bit less volatile. So to me, whenever I encounter in anime or a writer that says, no, I know English too, let's do a English version, I want to oversee an English version and a Japanese version, and these are both my products, but I will trust it with a colleague of mine who they collaborate with, and they produce an English version of it. You can definitely tell when there is an English comprehension and a Japanese comprehension, but that costs a lot of money, that's very risky, and it doesn't cater to people who view that the original is the most important, which I do feel is a very specific case for the passionate anime community. It is not true, in my opinion, for cinema. Cinema, in my opinion, has graduated from this. Cinema does not create this. Like, for example, a good example would be Infernal Affairs. Infernal Affairs. Not only that, they don't even keep the same names, right? Or they don't. And The Departed. I really liked Infernal Affairs, the Hong Kong produced thing, and I really like Scorsese's The Departed. They're connected. This, quote unquote, was the OG. This is the American version, or the Americanized version. Or right now, I'm currently watching a Three Body Problem, right? Three Body Problem. And the OG in 2023 was Chinese. It was by a Chinese writer. And Netflix just released Three Body Problem 2024. And I really like this too. It was quite different. Both of these are quite different. I'm not finished watching this, but even from like the first 4 episodes, there's quite a startling difference between these two. Now, if I were to ask the majority of target audience, they're going to pick which one's better. Right? And yeah, you can kind of make a comparison, but I compare and contrast. Right? It takes perspective to understand what Netflix's 3 body problem requires and what 3 body problem in China requires. They're different. There are a lot of different requirements. If one is really interested, in my opinion, if one is really interested in the nuances of Japanese, why does English get a double standard from you? Personally, I don't. I try not to double standard this. I love the nuances and stuff of Japanese, well, so I'll try to continue learning the nuances of Japanese. But I love my English. That is why I love learning Japanese and its nuances. I know a lot, in my opinion, humbly, very humbly. I appreciate all the things I don't know about English and the things I continue to learn about English. But it is also one and the same. It's not a double standard. Right? And I don't want to make a double standard for other people. Or I try not to. The key word here is try not to. Right? Try not to. We're just different. I watched Freean line by line mining words, and that gave me enough time to take in every word. Made it better, in my opinion. That's great. That's great. We're just different. In this case, we're not different in that case. I mined Freean line by line as well, but I did it in both languages. So I did a scene, I mined the entire English, and then I compared and contrasted by mining the entire lines in Japanese. So in the case when you said you watched Freean line by line mining and it gave you enough time to take in every word and made it better, we're the same there. How we're different is that you make an exception for Japanese, but you don't make an exception for English. So that's where we differ. Not necessarily having a lower appreciation for word mining and getting closer to an anime by mining each word. I still do the same. I do not make an exception for English. English doesn't cheapen the experience. It is a different experience that is worth mining as well. That's where we differ, in my opinion. Oh, you were talking to Nar and Hugh. Oh, okay. That's fair. And just so you know, we talked about this earlier. I want to deflate something. Granola, we talked about time. Time is why I can do this. So, before everyone goes crazy about me and saying that I care more about certain things, I have more time. So, we have to keep in mind that the reason why people pick, like, one of the biggest motivators is you are prioritizing what's important, and that's really reasonable. So I don't want to, I'm trying not to make it sound like there's a right way to do things, right? This prioritization is the right way. So you don't have to care about Japanese and English equally. You're choosing what is important to you. So I have to recognize that. While at the same time, it's probably prudent to understand it is a double standard, right? So you at least know that, English, not as exciting. It's kind of dumb, right? It's kind of a parody kind of thing. You gotta go? Take care, Yadoko. Take care. Thanks for sharing, by the way. Let's see. Did you guys talk about Norwegian? I'm gonna guess you're not from Norway because kids in your school can't English? So you're saying most Norwegian classes have English comprehension? That's interesting. No, man, I was surprised how many languages did this man speak? Oh, me? By the way, you are from Norway. Is it true that you learned Danish? You could understand both Swedish and Norwegian. Partially, Nar says. You can understand written, communicate with people, but there's a limit to the comprehension. Wow. So you get some Swedish and Norwegian cross, I see. Like that, so it wasn't like what I expect. Okay, 3 and 1. They're very similar, Swedish and Norwegian, that is. You can understand a lot of the other two, learning only one. Oh, interesting. If you want a good language feel, look at Serbian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Bosnian. It's 4 and 1. Oh, now you guys are really talking about some epic high value language learning. All right. I was catching up on the other side. Sorry. Let me try to read these before I continue doing my Japanese lessons. By the way, today's a review day, so it's a shortened day. We'll chalk this up for a extra video, I suppose. Anything for content, guys. Sorry, not sorry. You used to be a more radical on the must-watch original content, but I've learned after seeing original JP content and translating JP content, original EN content, and translating EN content. For me, each experience, yeah. And, you know, it's if you have time, right? And what's important to you. So everyone has their preferences, and that's fantastic, in my opinion. The reason why we're having this long discussion or like having fun going back and forth and sharing our thoughts is all of us have different perspectives. At least I think that's cool, as long as we can remind ourselves that we can respect each other. I think granola has a very high preference and they know what they're doing. And in my opinion, granola's Japanese will always be better than my Japanese, largely because granola's priorities are not distributed like mine. For example, if you're thinking of a pragmatic thing, I divide my time between English, Chinese, and Japanese even before I started learning Japanese and Mandarin. And at home, I don't speak English with my parents, so I could be practicing English at home or Japanese at home, but I speak Fujianese with my parents. So that's time devoted for something else. If I tried to learn Japanese because I wanted to watch it in the original form, I would quickly lose interest, considering the fact that I could have a better experience watching English dub or sub. Interesting. Actually, so true. I actively avoid watching shows or playing games like that in the language I'm learning because of that. Oh, huh. That's an interesting thought. It took me so long to be able to enjoy English content well enough that I think it's not worth studying it just for that. Yeah, just for that. All of the above. Be greedy, guys. It's not just learning the words or whatever. I still learned so many cultural references in different media that I had no idea usually. You know what's... Hey, Kinorashi. Early today. We're just dragging this conversation so you can slack. Okay. Here's one thing. Have you guys, granola, everyone, have you guys ever watched a show or a movie that the content is literally different because of the different cultures? So what I'm saying is like if you're learning a language and you're watching a kids show, right? Like a kids show. I don't know if you guys are aware, but lots of those kids shows internationally, they actually literally change to represent the cultures. Like, it's really interesting. Like all the little tiny bits that you can pick up. Like they had to change it because of cultural relevance. I don't know how often you guys watch these shows. Like Pixar is a great example. Pixar movies, but I've heard of ghost stories. You mean the Chinese one, right? Nar? The one that was originally Chinese? Or are you talking about Chinese ghost stories? Because if you're talking about Chinese ghost stories, I know what you're talking about. Unless it's something else. You're going to have to be a little bit more... you're going to have to explain that a little bit. There's a lot of ghost stories. There's one that I'm specifically thinking that changed completely. Oh, it's a Japanese anime. The dub is different. Wait. Ghost story. Is this recent? Hold up. No, wait. Yeah. Oh, wait. Was it originally anime? You're talking about the 2000 one, right? Oh, no. This isn't the same one. Are you talking about the 2000 one? I'm not familiar with this one. It's something else. I'm thinking of something else. It also deals with ghost stories, though. And it's hilarious what happened to the English thing. Because I watched it first in English. Steins Gate dub is very different from its subtitles. Indeed. Steins Gate is very different. Sci-fi is incredibly different most of the time. There's an anime that was a flop in Japan. Oh yeah, it is the same one. Yeah, because it got all vulgar. Like the English one, it has so many wasn't yeah, which one is that? Is that the ghost story one? Where it just become like it's so different. Like the dubbing was like for Zoomer dubbing. Like what I mean is like it became super vulgar and like it almost became like a parody in itself. Like Granola mentioned the word parody. I think it's Ghost Stories, isn't it? The show when it got dubbed, it practically became like Family Guy. Like what I mean is like it became slapstick comedy. Like it wasn't like serious about ghost stories anymore. Because is it the same one with all the memes and like it became like, how do I describe it? Right? The excessively vulgar, it is the same one. I see. Okay. Or I think you might be talking to each other here. Yeah, for now, I'm only watching the lower rated movies and shows in Japanese because I wouldn't be missing much. Ooh, that's an interesting about it. Only planning on watching the shows and movies I like once I get fully fluent. Okay, you're saving. Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm slacking on Duo at this point. I'm way ahead, so no worries. It's fine. This is review day. I grew up watching it in Portuguese, and that dub is more like the Japanese one. I watched it again in Japanese and then dropped and keep watching in the English dub. That was shocking. Dude, I think it is the same one. I'm pretty sure it's the same. The Ghost Story dub. I watched clips of this. Let me see. It's gotta be this one. Hold up. Yeah, it is this one. Yeah, it's the one that when the English got dubbed, when they dubbed the English, it's like incredibly aggressively offensive. And what I mean by that is not aggressively offensive in the sense of oh, it's unintentionally offensive. I mean, it is like hilariously offensive. Like what I mean by that is like there's like vulgarity and aggressive language that gave it a really different perspective on what the show was going for, and it is a in success when it came that the dub decided, oh, we're just gonna flip the script, literally flip the script on it. I saw so many clips of the dub of the show. I haven't watched it in its entirety though, so I can definitely say I was shocked. I think this was a couple years ago. I was pretty shocked by the dubbing. That's a good example though. That's a good example. I think video games is a great example. You only saw one episode, but they basically joked with things a teenager would joke on. Yes, exactly. I think it's a good way. It's a good example. You watch the English dub in full, but honestly, I can't remember much of the plot. It was hard to take it serious. They didn't. You know what I mean, right, Nar? Right? The dub group clearly didn't take it seriously. Like they knew they weren't taking themselves seriously. And that's what made the English dub surprisingly accessible, right? You guys got to watch clips of this. If you haven't seen the English dub of Ghost Stories, it's pretty clear they weren't taking it seriously. Like it was less about the plot in the end because the plot doesn't matter anymore. Yeah, the story failed. Yeah, the story failed in Japan. They didn't want to repeat. Yeah, they didn't want a repeat of the failed story. So they just went. The script was just thrown way off the rails. It was just like, nah, 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 nah. We're not gonna try to make the story, but we're not gonna try to translate this into the story. Now we're just gonna redub it, and it almost feels like an awkward out of context moment, but it was surprisingly on point. Like, hey guys, wait, there's a spirit. Oh no, it's like attacking me. Things are bad. We should go and help her. Ah, oh no, this thing is chasing. It's kind of like that. It like, wow. To me, it almost feels like the early 2010s of YouTube comedy. You know what I mean? Right? You know what I mean by that? Like, it kind of feels like Charlie the Unicorn and all that stuff, like the early YouTube days where, oh, this is stupidly funny. As in, you know, this kind of works. It's very stupid. It feels like an American show, and it worked. One show that is weirdly much more popular in a transform material than its original, I think, is Everybody Hates Chris. Yeah. Good example. Yes. American show, but I rarely see Americans who have seen it. Everyone here knows it. Yeah. Everybody Hates Chris is a good one. I think for me, what is a good example of a Japanese one? It's not like quite. I'm trying to think of like big cinema. Big cinema. I think for me, surprisingly, I think FMA is probably something everyone has watched. But at the same time, the dub for FMA, I guess both, but we'll just write Brotherhood. It's largely due to the setting, right? It's the setting. When you have Western fantasy, or like sci-fi, they're heavily westernized. They're heavily westernized because of their origins. You know, sci-fi. It's largely Western sci-fi and fantasy. And Cowboy Bebop is a great example, right? Cowboy Bebop. Even down to the music, right? Things that deal with like mafia stuff, mafia, organized crime translates really well. Examples I can think of is like 81 Days. Not the other thing, not 86. 81 Days, Bakano, Bakano, Banana Fish. I don't know if you guys ever seen these, but Banana Fish, Monster. Monster is a great example. I saw German, so Monster. Monster is another one. The German one actually works really, really well. Because Monster, it's an interaction between a Japanese and a German group. So, yeah. Banana Fish, a good one from Netflix. A good one from Netflix, or sponsored by Netflix, right? Published by Netflix. Great Pretender. Great Pretender. Because it's basically like Ocean's 11 and like Hollywood. It's Hollywood, Pulp Fiction stuff. Anything that deals with like Pulp Fiction, and Pulp Fiction itself is actually, Tarantino is inspired by Japanese, so it's like kind of full circle and all that stuff. But like Ocean's stuff, organized crime, like heist things, right? Heist things. Great Pretenders is a great example. It's fantastic. The dub is incredibly fantastic. Great Pretenders. If you like heist things, That's why when you had Infernal Affairs and Scorsese does like these types of films. If you have heist movies or cops, right? Serendipitous like British stuff where like a series of unfortunate events that lead into each other coincidentally. That is stuff that translates super well. In fact, to the point where I think most people didn't know that it was in Japanese. As in, like, when they see it, they're like, wait a minute, there's a Japanese version. And when you hear the Japanese version, it becomes more like comedy as opposed to melodrama. So, like, for example, Great Pretenders is a great, like, I was watching the Japanese version. It's more like a Black Lagoon situation. Oh, Black Lagoon is a good example too. I'm basically harping on the specific genre that the dubs, quote unquote, the English is like militaristic. It's militaristic. Um, what you call it? Zero sum game. So it's preying on like the Hollywood approach. Basically, oh yeah, if we do this, we're going to die. And then when you hear the Japanese, it's like comedy and slice of life. Like, oh, you know, they almost died, but no big deal. Like the MC is incompetent. The MC is incompetent, and like no big deal. It's just anime, right? Kind of thing. Like, oh yeah, he almost died like 15 times, but yeah, just brush it off. It's anime. Like, whoop, life goes on. And then when you hear the dub, the English dub, it's like depression, existential crisis. You know, like feeling like being abused because it's military. So English culture, right? English speak like entertainment relies on a lot of militaristic stuff, militaristic intrigue. You know what is fantastic? Gundam. The Gundam series is a great example of the dichotomy between executing on militaristic stuff versus emotional like I believe in stuff. Like this is more like espresso depresso, everyone is dead, you know, stuff, right? Like life, it is what it is kind of thing. This is like racism, discrimination. Like it's a really different feel. I started with Gundam and I watched both, right? And the English is clearly, people know the even the typical schools of voice acting and stuff knows how it feels to like reproduce a military feel to things, because war and stuff is a very common vehicle, right? So that's kind of what I mean. So these are good examples where certain English, the culture itself, the culture that's associated with a language legitimately causes the change in the content. A lot of what happens to anime have to do with agenda of the dubbing studio. So yes, true. Some lines and personality people complete. Yeah, true. Well, one could also say it gives the flexibility of the voice actors, right? Let's not forget that the voice actors themselves also want to not be a clone, right? We have to remember that there are a lot of creators involved. Not that you can choose if you want to appreciate it or not, because you don't have to watch the show. Obviously, you don't have to watch the dub. For me, when someone says, "Oh yeah, this is a big gruffy guy," what does that mean to a Japanese person, and what does that mean to an American person? They're very different things, by the way. I chose an archetype that separates the two. Most people want to see the original creation. Yeah, pretty much. I that's what the whole point of this is. I actually think, with all that said, whatever I suggested, that's a minority voice. It's largely a minority voice. I believe that what is prioritized by Granola, in my opinion, is fair. It actually is the agenda. It is the agenda. So when people say like, oh yeah, dubs are parodies, basically, it's the agenda. It's diminished return. Like, most people statistically still want to see the original, right? The original is not a facsimile. The original is the original. So when you think about incentivizing good dubs, I mean, it's diminished return. It's an uphill battle. So we still have to remember there's also business and creative freedoms and liberties and restrictions, right? A director can have all the most creative ideas in the world, but if they're going to make a sequel to a movie that had a successful original concept, it's not like the director is going to say like, I'm just going to do my own thing and we're just going to ignore the original creation, right? So one thing I have to say though, as a person who feels like they like to create things, I don't want other people to treat me like that. And I also don't want to treat other people like that. So when you tell me, for example, this is the last message I want to give before I go on with my Japanese lesson and then like finish the day off with Chinese. I don't think that the people I talk to are incapable of being creative. Now you might be thinking, well, yeah, right? Well, yeah. Now, hear me out here. Just hear me out. This is my message most of the time. The reason why I say this is because, to me, someone mentioned totem of motivation. Totem of motivation. My totem of motivation is I believe this. I don't think this is pretty I should have wrote I think that the people are capable of being creative. So what I mean by that is, when someone tells me something, I prefer to trust that they are passionate about what they do and that they value what they do. Why is this relevant to what we're talking about now? The idea that someone's creative work is lesser than another person's creative work makes this, for me, not very pragmatic. So what I mean by that is, if I don't keep this idea with me, that I think that the people I talk to, or the people that shares their time with me are capable of being creative, then it would suggest that I will then, whenever someone talks to me, it's easier for me to brush them aside. And I still humanly do this. I try not to do this. So for example, if someone comes up to me and they are the 30th person to tell me that I can't learn anything with Duolingo, for example, right? Oh, this comment is just like the last 20 people who said the exact same thing. It's like, is this comment cheapened by the first comment I've heard? And I try very hard to think, no. Let's wait. Let's hear this person out. I really need to try to hear this person out. There is a chance that even if this person is the 20th person to say this, they are capable of being creative. So when someone approaches me with a question and it sounds like 100 other questions, and I have ideas, as in I have predispositions, like, oh, maybe they're going to tell me this and this and this, let's find out. As in, I've done this for a really long time now. It can go in 10 different ways, but I'll still try my best to continue to believe it can be emergent, creative, as in emergent, right? So even if I knew statistically, which is why I'm still using Duolingo now, it's pervasive through everything I know. Against, some people would say against my better judgment, I'm saying if I have the time, I know what the statistical outcomes are. Lots of people inform me about the statistical outcome. The question is, do I want to be creative about it? Just like this person who was like the 20th person who told me I can't learn anything with Duolingo, or the 20th person that told me dubs suck and subs for life, or etc. If I continue to believe this, I will naturally try to talk to the person, and I will try to care about the person. I'll try to, even still against my better judgment, right? Or like against all the pragmatic things. It's not very pragmatic if you have priorities, right? Priorities. So for example, I don't have time for this. I've already heard this comment before. Let me guess, you're going to say this, and then you're going to say this. You're going to raise Anki. You're going to talk about Anki. You're going to talk about immersion. I should get a tutor. We should definitely listen to native resources. And then I'm going to go into all the examples that I've used for native resources. And then it's like, oh, if you're not going to that, then you're going to be going into comprehensible input. All this stuff I learned. I learned from interacting from other people, even for the 20th time, for the 30th time, for the 40th time. How do you learn things, right? How do you gain experience? By doing them. If, big if, with 3 F's, big if you have time. If you have time, right? Sorry, I'm writing off screen. If you have time. I kind of do, so I try my best. We're having this discussion, and it goes all the way back to this discussion. We're having this discussion because I think all of you have reasonable time to discuss with each other, so we might as well make the best of it, right? We want to make the best of it. Everyone has differing opinions, and it's great to hear everyone's different opinions because this is voluntary, right? Voluntary things should make us all feel good, in my opinion. Just because we disagree doesn't necessarily mean we can't be happy for each other. Now, if it was something we have to do, then that's a different story, right? We don't have to argue about it. So, to me, this is my resolving take-home message. I want to believe that when someone makes a comment they could be creative about it. Not because they're echoing and pushing whatever the originator is. And you might be thinking, how does this relate to anime? Anime has a standard. That standard is echoed and maintained. So if you're always wondering, why does successful things not take chances on new things? It's largely the same perspective that people predicate on preferring the original. So when things don't change, it's not necessarily because people aren't open to change per se. It's they want to maintain the status quo, the consistency. So will dubs get better? Quote unquote, will dubs change if most people don't prefer it? No. It takes brave people, creative people even, that have the totem of motivation to create new standards. Like, it takes creative people to beat all odds, the totem of motivation, in order to create new standards. If you're someone who focuses on origination, then everything stays preservationist. In my opinion, you're more likely to preserve things. You know, prefer one over the other. Oh, this isn't like the Japanese. Let's just keep it Japanese. Let's just keep it Japanese and it stays Japanese. That kind of thing. And that's the human condition. I'm describing the human condition. So it's not like I'm not immune to this. I'm human, so I tackle this all the time. Like, oh yeah, I love this sandwich. Do I ever want to change it? I mean, the sandwich is really good already. Do I want to change it? Like, I'm in the United States, Asian fusion town, okay? So, yeah, I want my spicy mayo, my spicy goopy mayo ranch dressing on my kimchi tater tots. Does that sound blasphemous? It probably does. I think some Koreans probably just turned over in their bed and heard my voice and is already cursing my life. So, you know, it is just to keep in mind. So for me, your advice, all your comments, my enthusiasm about your comments is that I think you're capable of creative and emergent information synthesizing, not peddling unoriginal ideas or echo chamber stuff. So your opinions are your own, hopefully. I hope that the small amount of interactions that I have, relatively speaking, are with people who have original ideas. Not original in the sense of it has to be different, but original in the sense that you took all the information you had and experiences you have and you created you know, a new opinion as opposed to peddling what someone else said. I take all my opinions from your favorite influencers. Okay. All right. Your avatar is very familiar, so that checks out. Somewhat related to the previous discussion, when the Mario movie was coming out, there was this movement of people saying we have to watch the dub since the BR actor was putting on a better Italian impression than Chris Pratt. Oh, interesting. I thought that was a funny way of looking at it. I did watch the Super Mario movie in 2 different languages, but only 2. Yeah, the Brazilian actor. That's interesting. A better Italian accent. Huh. I don't know if Chris Pratt was going for Italian though. I think Chris Pratt was going for New Yorker or Long Islander, as in like Italian American. I don't know if that's was his intent. I actually never seen an interview. Uh, um, yeah, Chris Pratt had that wave of criticism since he said he really worked on it, and people were saying he just sounded like himself. I don't know if Chris Pratt. I don't know if Chris Pratt is a. Do anyone know if Chris Pratt is like Italian? And what I mean by Italian, I mean is he multi? Is there a chance he's multi-generational American, but he's Italian? I have no idea what Chris Pratt's background is. Because there is what if he is Italian American? Like, what I mean is, he worked on it, right? But what if he is? By like coincidence. I'm just saying by coincidence. What if that's his vision of what an Italian American sounds like? Because I think the you know, the how do you say it? The city that they were modeling in Super Mario, the city that they had was Americanized, right? It's an Americanized city. So there is and then they did the pizzeria thing, right? The pizzeria thing and whatnot in the corner store. So you might think Italian American. An Italian American doesn't sound like an Italian speaking American, right? Which I had the privilege of having a boss who was an Italian who speaks American. And yeah, Chris Pratt doesn't sound like that, for sure. You know, what studying do I do outside of Duolingo? What studying do I do outside of Duolingo? I don't study outside of Duolingo. I do practice out of. I do input, I suppose. I do input outside of Duolingo though. And I want to be specific. I do input as in I didn't like focus on, you know, like dictionaries and like I don't do it very often. And like sentence mining, I don't do it as often as other people. Like sentence mining, like I don't actively study something. Most of it is input. So most of it is input. So comprehensible input. That's like vlogs, podcasts, or not really podcasts. It's really vlogs, but the vlogs happen to be podcasts as well. If you don't look at the screen, right? They call them vlogs, but they're vlogs that are in the form of a podcast. And then like grade readers, technically grade readers, I don't think that's the same as studying because I'm not practicing anything. I'm reading for comprehension. So you either comprehend it or you don't and then come back to it. So technically the most amount of active studying that I would do is Duolingo for now, right? I practice output outside of Duolingo though. I do a lot of practicing of output outside of Duolingo. What JP podcast is that? I wanted to find a good one. I recommend someone asked me this and I've been watching this guy. It's is it called Japanese with Shun? I just know his name is Shun. So if you like type Japanese and Shun, I forgot his channel name. but Shun is his name. He recently, I guess this is a shout out to Shun. He recently passed 100K. He has a very humble thing. He's been doing it for years, but they do like this person largely focuses on comprehensible input when it vlogs about random things. Like he moves around and goes on vacation and stuff and does interviews in Japan, and kind of he makes an attempt to mark what comprehensibility it has, and he uses Genki as a reference on how comprehensible. So like he'll write N5 to N4 maybe. It's like, oh, this is from like N4 to N1, but the average is about like N3, that kind of thing. So and it's in the form of more or less a podcast and stuff. So you can there are other people. If you watch this, YouTube will probably show you others. So oftentimes when you start with a vlog like this and then you watch it and then suddenly, you know, YouTube will recommend other shows like this. So that's what I mean by it's kind of like studying, I guess, but it's more like soaking in. So I watch him talk about things and he already tells you what he's going to talk about. So is that studying? I don't know. It's more like enjoying XP, but you're really taking it in. I really want to find some podcasts like Trash Taste. Yeah. I've asked JP friends and they couldn't tell me about any equivalent podcast. I like this guy. This guy is very quaint. Someone else recommended, I don't remember her name. You'll probably end up finding out many of these. There was another, I think it's comprehensible. She has this person has a more comprehensible Japanese. I think that's her actual type. Like this is literally the channel's name, comprehensible Japanese. Someone else recommended this one, and she's very quaint too. She's quite quaint, and there's a lot of related YouTube channels that deal with this one too, and they're both related as well, as in their approach is to talk about things, talk about their lives, but also be incredibly cognizant of what the level of comprehensibility it is. So that's where I just tune in every once in a while. So that's what I do. And then the rest of the day, right? The rest of the day, I engage in my own content. I'm still learning English. So, right, like I don't stop consuming things in English. English is required for my understanding of like science and other things. I can't do that in Japanese at the moment. If by chance a program is in Japanese and I can use English and leverage them together, then I would do that as much as I can. And in this situation, outside of Duolingo, I'm not studying anymore. Like I'm not technically studying per se. I'm gaining experience, exposure. So it's largely just exposure, right? And most people would call that input, I suppose. It's largely input. This is usually the time I'm actually concerned about getting things right. I'm not actually concerned about getting things right outside of Duolingo. In fact, Duolingo's double edge is that they're incredibly concerned about getting things right. Like right? Even if it's weird or unnatural, they're still focused on getting it right, as opposed to paraphrasing, feeling out the meaning, right? When I'm learning Mandarin, it's even more like that. When I'm watching Mandarin stuff, I feel it. So whenever I feel it, I start associating words that I see in the subtitles, and sound that I hear over and over again. So then it becomes a feeling most of the time. So the new words I'm learning in Duolingo, it's adding to my feel. So when it like Lao Gung was all over the place. It was Lao Po and Lao Gung in the movie that someone recommended, who happens to be Chinese, and they recommended the 2010 movie Let the Bullets Fly with Chow Yun-fat. That stuff they keep on talking about. The what you call it? I guess right now I have about 40 words maybe in Duolingo Mandarin, and it was easier for me to pick up all those words in the conversation because I'm already used to feeling where the words are going to be. And then when I see something like the event is happening, I'm expecting all those things. And that's kind of what's happening in Japanese. So when you're watching a vlogger or a podcast that focuses on comprehensible inputs, you can frame all the things around. I like watching Frieren, right? The anime Frieren. I watched the English already. And now I'm watching the Japanese. And then I'm watching the Japanese. And then I'm watching, and then follow up by watching English. So the thing is, I'm comparing and contrasting the two, like scene for scene, because I really like the show. And it's helping me understand English complexities and Japanese complexities at the same time. So am I studying per se? There might be some studying involved. Like I might look up a word that I don't know. However, I'm not drilling. So the thing that I do really less of because of Duolingo is I do little to no SRS outside of Duolingo. When I start stream, I do active recall, which is part of SRS that people are underutilized, right? And then I do it on my own time. Like when I'm walking around, eating dinner, watching a movie or something, I'm actively recalling. So my SRS is just the recall portion. And then Duolingo continues to provide the SRS, like, oh, here's the word again, here's the character, let's associate them together and whatnot, and pattern recognition and all that stuff. And from time to time, from really time to time, maybe once a week, I look at a new grammar structure or something. New grammar structure. And that's fine. How often, in my opinion, how often have you used the common language English? Say we're all common English language speakers, right? How often do you form complex clauses while you're speaking in English? So oftentimes, grammar comes very, very late. When I'm very interested in, you know what? This came up a lot. How do you contract two independent clauses by interweaving a transitional word in this language? Then I am motivated to look up more grammar, right? So this may be like once a week, possibly. Basic sentence structure. I heard this phrase a lot thrown at me. Basic sentence structure. Have you guys read Twitch before or chat? Right? Somehow basic sentence structure became like a second-class citizen or something. When inherently basic sentence structure is a large majority of conversations. So if you want to like become a complex scholar and whatnot, that's very admirable and respectful. At the same time, I think sentence structure comes with motivated exploration and doing things like a transitional word while you're talking. Like firstly, I'll make 3 separate points. 1, etc., etc. Following that, furthermore, in addition, and finally, right, these type of things rarely ever come up in chat and things like that. I'm interested in those things, but I don't really look them up very soon, like very quickly. And when I start to write something, maybe if I start writing a story or something, perhaps I'll look up more complex grammar structure. So that's kind of an idea. So we're gonna wrap this up because I've slacked off enough for today, and leave it with the message. Norway has way less YouTubers, but it was easy for you to find such type of content you like. I see. I have to believe it's just that Norway have much more influence from the English community. I see. That's fair. Yeah. I honestly think being invested in someone that also lines up as much, finding one of those rare gems. I I found a few, and it was actually through the recommendation. It's like indirectly because of the recommendation and suggestion of other people. And the recommendation and suggestion came from my interaction with other people. So, right, like person A that I've met interacted with me over the course of months, actually, now. So we've known each other for months, right? So this person got to know me, and sure enough, most of their recommendations or the things they use indirectly inspired me to do everything I'm currently doing in addition. So indirectly inspired me. That's kind of where this generally goes, right? If the person is invested in you, they are more likely to understand what your needs and desires are. I love the 3 body problem right now. And I love hearing it in Mandarin. It's fantastic, and it's due to someone I only knew for like 3 weeks, actually. Even less than 3 weeks, probably. And I like grade readers, especially I'm still working through like grade readers from the original recommendation by someone else. But I won't mention names for now. Like Shady is this inspiration, and Lotus is this inspiration. So things like that help motivate me most of the time, right? So I do a lot of things right now, but I don't have a day job, so I can still do this while doing everything else, right? And what's take home message? I like to invest in people. Invest in people, not the content. So, content second, in my opinion. I invest in people. So, if the content is not original, say, like to relate everything that we've talked about, if it's not original, that's irrelevant. I'm investing in the person. So, like, if a writer is writing the American version, for example, just to relate everything, the American version, the English version of a Japanese anime, if I'm going to watch this thing, I want to understand the writer of this. And then when I'm watching the Japanese, I want to understand the Japanese writer of the product. They are both individual peeps, right? So that's the take-home message. I'm not investing in Japanese, the language. I'm more investing in the people that learn the language. So, have I gotten to the point where I had an opportunity to know native speakers? No. If I get lucky and they are willing to invest in me, then I'll take it. there are other people that are using Japanese right now, other learners. So if they're willing to invest in me, I'm willing to invest in them. And that's where we are right now. Why do I continue to use Duolingo? Because there are people who are more likely to talk about learning and sharing ideas in this context than the people who are going around silently but vocally telling what other people what to do without knowing them. I will wholeheartedly admit when someone asks me a question, my first comment is, okay, I don't really know you. We just met. However, there's a lot of things people say very often. Maybe some of these things are helpful, right? But I am not confident. However, if you start learning Japanese and every so often, maybe once a week, you tell me like what you like about it, what are you doing, what are you currently doing, we might be able to develop an understanding for each other in which we can be comfortably able to motivate each other and help each other out. And if they become really successful, it's not dependent, right? Like eventually it's two independent learners who are helping each other in the meantime, but when they no longer help each other, they can leave each other. There's no dependency. We've exchanged ideas. So for me, that is the take-home message here. How it's related to everything we're talking about, because I think almost everyone who had different opinions about the content here, at least in my opinion, I'm surrounded by people who respect that there's a person or persons behind the content. So when we were talking about priorities of anime and dubs and subs and stuff, all of us still had the mutual respect that there are people behind all those things that we want to get to know, right? We're trying to get to know the people, right? As opposed to making the content define the worth of the person, at least in my opinion. So the take-home message here is, even though from time to time, right, it's a human condition to save time by saying, oh yeah, you're probably like all the other 99% of people, or statistically you're more likely to do this, and what's in that, I don't have time for this kind of thing. Like, oh yeah, this is the 30th time I've heard this. Not so important. If time permits, I like to believe that I try not to do this to the best of my ability at the moment, and try to invest some time, because the more you do, the more connections you have, and as much foresight as a human being can have, you have no idea how successful the person you connect with can be, or how much they can benefit from your connection. Yesterday, just to tie one last thing, yesterday Granola asked me, like, how can I afford to do this for however amount of time? And I'm gonna say, well, the savings came up, right? The idea of savings. And it's like, well, yes, you could say that. I am on borrowed time, so eventually we're gonna have to think about that. However, for now, the reason why I'm in the position I am, in my opinion, is that I continue to invest in people. It's so arrogant, in my opinion. It's almost foolishly arrogant if you think that you know exactly what the person is going to amount to with or without your influence, as in with or without your investment. So for me, again, I try my best I'm not always successful, and sometimes I fail myself and disappoint myself for sure. To connect with as many people, because that is where the luck comes from. You just have no idea who you're helping. You cannot see the future. That one thing could be like a strange anecdote. Could be a random wedding invitation because you came across path and you left an impression on their life, and then you randomly get a wedding invitation. And am I going to go to it? Of course I'm going to go to it. It's a person's special day, right? So that's kind of, I could have thought of a more pragmatic situation, but I think it's pretty wholesome in that way. It's like, really? Me? You want me to be part, like, to go to your wedding, even though, like, we talk once a year? That's kind of the idea. So if you have time, in my opinion, if you have time, right? It's a big if with 4 F's. If you have time, investing people is the wild card. And just, you won't know. It's very difficult. Which, by the way, I don't want to make this sound too negative. It can go the other way too, right? Ignoring people. You just don't know what will happen if you decide to ignore someone, right? But let's focus on the positive for now. It can go any way. The idea is I'm willing to bet. I can't spell bet. I'm willing to bet on anyone who's willing to give me the time of day, then not at all. For the rest of my life, I'm perfectly fine with that. You know, that's legacy. So that's the take-home message. It permeates everything I do. Like, for example, it's hard for me to call something garbage. It's hard to say things like, this is the worst thing ever. All these things come up all the time, but I can't resonate with those people because someone worked and made things free, even sort of perspectives like, this is garbage, this is the worst thing, it never works, everyone is the same, oh, all you people are similar. That's the type of thing that I won't be able to resonate with, but I have to accept that it's faster to think this way, right? It's more efficient, and efficiency is king when you're talking to people who are limited with time. And I acknowledge that with granola and whatnot, because that urgency is very real. It's incredibly real. I'm speaking from a privileged situation because that privilege came with luck. And my luck in life was built on investing in people. I invested forward. In fact, to the point of my detriment of my health. I sacrificed my health for the most part early in life, investing forward in people, which generated luck. And now I'm in this position. Not a life hack, just say attempt to share a different message that maybe not a lot of people hear these days because they built their own dream. You know, the phrase is, I built my own dream, right? I can't say that. I really can't say that. I didn't build the dream alone. I didn't get here alone. At least in my opinion. Like, we're talking about philosophy and stuff. I got here on the backs and efforts of quote unquote my predecessors. So how could I ever say something like the original is always the best? Right? This tool is always going to be the GOAT. Duolingo is always going to suck. It's not too far from there. I think people are creative. It takes investment. Time is both a bane and a positive. Like, is how you use it. So I think people can change. I think people can improve. They can grow. They can evolve. Like, there are a lot of things people can do. So I prefer to even to my detriment sometimes, to invest in people. Maybe if you had my last encouragement is like, if you had 30 minutes, how would you want to spend it? Right? You can choose, respectfully so, to self-improve. That is very admirable and respectful. Sometimes I have lots of time, so I have more than 30 minutes, so I spend like 30 minutes self-improving, and I spend 4 hours instead giving. And depending on how much time you have, you can ask yourself, how much of a person's life can you change if you're willing to invest 10 minutes of your time? How much does that cost you? And can you present that much value to another person, right? Instead of yourself. It's not always clear cut. Some people are very not in that privileged situation. So for me, I don't see 8 hours streaming Duolingo as an investment in just myself. It's a voluntary generosity that I'm throwing out there, and some people are going to think it's a waste of time, and some people are going to think it's valuable. But I'm giving it freely. Like, I'm not expecting payment back, right? So oftentimes that's forgotten. When someone gives me advice about language learning, they have often forgotten that I could do something else. I could not stream at all, and they wouldn't even know I exist. So that would be a person who's focused on their own progress and their own language proficiency. I'm streaming, so the idea is I'm probably not focused simply on learning my proficiency. I might not get proficient at all, really. But I sure as heck am not going to think it's a waste of time. Things I voluntarily choose to give is gift. It's not a waste of time. So that's probably my last message. Ask yourself, right? Ask yourself, how are you using your time? And what is the the pragmatic potential of what you're doing? If someone told me today that they live nearby me and they're having trouble walking, like getting some exercise walking, like, hey, if you're comfortable, let's spend 15 minutes and go on a walk together. Let's do it. Why not? And that's 15 minutes less that I can spend learning Japanese. But it is generally, for me, almost always worth investing in a person first. I don't care if that person goes off and forgets about me. That's fine, right? Like, someone literally asked me one time, I don't want to go here. Like, I don't, this is so troublesome. I'm having anxiety about it. And I literally got in a car, drove to that place, and drove them there and tried to show them that, hey, it isn't so bad, is it? Right? That is the take-home message here. I will continuously favor the person over whatever the content it is. right? Because the source of all the content, the inspirations, the advice, your well-being is what's contained in that person. So it does backfire for sure, but I'm willing to take that. So that's the take-home message. Invest in people, right? You'd be surprised how tolerant you become after that. Anyways, that's a good wrap. And I'm gonna take a quick bathroom break before I finish my Japanese lesson. Thanks for listening and hanging out, guys. Really appreciate it.